"32 more local coronavirus infections, about a third of them at a Shatin public housing estate." Summer holidays at kindergartens, primary and secondary schools brought forward starting next Monday. And the mayor of Seoul found dead in an apparent suicide amid allegations of sexual harassment.
Hello and a very good evening. The city today reported 32 more local coronavirus infections and 6 imported cases, pushing the city's tally to 1,403.
About a third of the new locally acquired infections involve residents of a public housing estate in Shatin. It all began with one resident of Mingchun House at Shochuno Estate in Shatin. The patient was confirmed earlier with COVID-19. While the patient's source of infection is still unknown, 11 more residents have come down with the virus. Staff with personal protective equipment sanitized the building today. Some residents have bought lots of food and daily necessities, saying they will stay home and isolate themselves for 2 weeks. While this woman is going to stay with her son for a while, another resident says he'll live in a hotel for now. Health authorities say there are no plans to evacuate residents of the virus-hit Mingchun House.
There may be possible environmental contamination in the building or in the nearby malls or common facilities, but there's no structural defects that can be found that can explain the transmission between the residents, because the units are in different directions and the sewage system are not interconnected.
Meanwhile, a dozen more cases linked to those stemming from taxi drivers eating together at Bunki Congee and Noodles at Pingshek Estate and Sanfat Restaurant in Jordan. Also a warning from the authorities.
We are worried about the locally acquired unknown sources cases, and because according to the trend in the recent few days, the spread of the infection seems to be very quick, and also many of the close contacts of the affected cases also claim to have symptoms. So it is possible that more cases will come, and there's a possibility of a big community outbreak.
The 9 cases with unidentifiable sources of infection include 2 staff members of cosmetics chain Sasa, so they work in different locations. Among the others, a 13-year-old student from Good Hope School, as well as the male owner of a tutorial center in North Point. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
In light of a spike in locally transmitted COVID-19 cases in the city, the government announced summer holidays at all kindergartens, primary and secondary schools will be brought forward this year starting next Monday.
But the education chief says individual schools still can hold key exams, including secondary school placement exams for primary 5 students. Haley Zhou reports.
Up to now, there has not been any confirmed cases of infection at schools, which reflect the good work of our schools. However, in view of the exponential growth of confirmed COVID-19 local cases over the past 2 days, the Education Bureau, after thorough consideration and consultation with experts, has decided that all secondary schools, primary schools, and kindergarten could advance the beginning of their summer holidays to next Monday.
This as the city has reported a spate of local COVID-19 infections for 2 straight days, sparking fears among school management staff and parents. Schools in Hong Kong reopened in May after 4 months of class suspensions and online teaching amid signs of a lull in local infections. The education chief says schools that are not prepared to go on a summer break right away on Monday can have students back at school in batches to finish any necessary work. And all schools should remain open until the originally scheduled last day of school to take care of students in need. Meanwhile, for important exams, schools are allowed to hold them as scheduled if they choose to.
Primary schools could continue with their scheduled examination in the following week, which means the primary 5 students. if they choose to. On the other hand, they could also choose to defer the examination to September, and the deadline for submission of the P5 internal assessment will be extended to the 20th of October. Examination for Secondary 3 to Secondary 5 students could continue next week in view of the need to prepare for the selection of subjects for Secondary 3 students and for the preparation of the DSE exam for the Secondary 4 and Secondary 5 students.
Schools choosing to hold exams should implement preventive measures such as temperature checks, hand hygiene, wearing face masks, and keeping a distance between students. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
An advisor to the chief executive on epidemic control measures says there may be two major sources of infection in the spike in local COVID-19 cases. David Hui has urged the government to test all those who are exempted from mandatory quarantine upon their arrival in Hong Kong. And the government started testing aircrew 2 days ago when they landed in the city.
The sources actually come from the exempt groups. Recently, there was a cargo ship coming in Hong Kong and staying for 3 days. And then when the cargo ship went to mainland China, several sailors actually became confirmed to have COVID-19. I think the testing should be extended to all those under the current exemptions. The other factors responsible for the recent outbreak in Hong Kong is that we also have had some defect with home quarantine. So some of the families actually live in public housing where there is no separate toilet and bedroom for the returnee. They should really go to a hotel for the home quarantine.
Hui also suggested the cancellation of this year's book fair. The event is scheduled to begin next week. The Secretary for Health and Welfare said the book fair would go ahead, but strict hygiene and crowd control measures would be implemented at the week-long event.
First of all, everyone must wear a mask, and secondly, an appropriate distance must be kept. There cannot be more than 60% of the normal capacity, and I understand the host organization is proceeding with great caution. It's issued a series of guidelines and we have given them advice.
Australia says it will halve the number of its citizens who are allowed to return home from overseas each week. This as health authorities struggle to contain a fresh COVID outbreak in the city of Melbourne. The state of Victoria, where Melbourne is located, reported 288 new cases today, a record daily increase for Australia. Authorities say starting on Monday, Australia will cap the number of returnees allowed back in at 4,000 a week.
In South Korea, the body of the mayor of Seoul has been found after a massive search in the northern part of the city. He went missing this week amid reports of alleged sexual harassment. Jameson Wong has more.
A letter left by Park Won-soon and read aloud by a Seoul city official said Park was sorry to all people. He asked that his body be cremated and the ashes scattered at his parents' grave. Goodbye everyone, he signed off without referring to the allegation against him. Park's body was found in a wooded hills area near his official residence around midnight local time after an extensive search. Police say there was no sign of foul play, but did not disclose the cause of death. His daughter reported him missing this week after receiving a message which she said appeared to be like a will. This week, the 64-year-old didn't show up for work and canceled all of his appointments. His phone was also turned off. Park was elected mayor in 2011 and later became the city's first leader to be voted to a third term. Recently, he launched an aggressive anti-coronavirus campaign, closing down thousands of night spots and banning rallies. The Yonhap news agency reported a former secretary had lodged a complaint against Park over alleged sexual harassment. That appears to be in direct contrast to his public persona as an advocate for women's rights and gender equality. In fact, the former lawyer won one of South Korea's earliest cases on sexual harassment. Politically, Park was a vocal critic of former President Park Geun-hye before her ouster in 2017. The former human rights activist was also seen as a possible candidate in the 2022 presidential elections. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
Elsewhere in Asia, Singaporeans have been voting in a general election that is expected to return Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's long-governing party to power. Polling stations across the city-state opened at 8 a.m. with strict safety and health measures in place because of the pandemic. Older voters were scheduled to vote early in the day as protection against the virus, and people being treated for COVID-19 or under quarantine at home were not allowed to vote. The health crisis and concerns about an economic recession will likely send voters to opt with Lee's People's Action Party. It faces 10 small opposition parties that are contesting the 93 parliamentary seats. And still ahead on tonight's news. The US Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's financial records. The US imposes sanctions against 4 Xinjiang officials over alleged human rights abuses. And the funeral of the late casino magnate Stanley Ho.
Welcome back to TVB News. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a New York prosecutor's demands for President Donald Trump's tax records.
But it has also returned the case back to the lower courts in New York to sort out, which means Trump's taxes and other financial records will likely be kept out of the public eye until after the presidential election. The U.S. Supreme Court is doing President Donald Trump no favors. On Thursday, America's highest court ruled that Trump's tax records can be examined by prosecutors in New York. While they sent the case back to the lower courts to sort out, the justices overwhelmingly rejected the president's argument that he is entitled to presidential immunity in this particular case.
The Supreme Court is saying, no, you're not above the law. You can't make those arguments. You can face prosecution.
Still, analysts say it wasn't a complete disaster for Trump.
Even though Trump lost the case involving the district attorney, probably means that none of the records that are being sought would become public before the election at the very earliest. And because the tax returns are being sought as part of a criminal grand jury investigation, which is normally confidential, it's not clear that those would ever become public.
And in a separate case to do with Trump, the justices kept on hold banking and other documents about him that Congress has been seeking to get hold of. Trump claims the whole saga is a political conspiracy designed to destroy him.
So from a certain point I'm satisfied, from another point I'm not satisfied, because frankly this is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt, it's a hoax.
Trump's tax records were sought for a criminal investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney as part of a broader probe that includes payments made to buy the silence of 2 women who claim they had affairs with the president before the 2016 election. Trump has refused to release his tax returns since he was a candidate and is the only modern president who hasn't made that information public.
The United States announced on Thursday it is sanctioning 4 Chinese officials over their alleged human rights abuses against the Uyghur Muslim minority. In response, Beijing warned it will take firm countermeasures against the U.S. Caleb Leung has the details.
Don't expect Sino-U.S. ties to improve anytime soon after the U.S. decided to impose sanctions against 4 Chinese officials. The highest-ranking official among the 4 is Chen Quanguo, Xinjiang Region's Communist Party Secretary. The others blacklisted are Zhu Hailun, Deputy Secretary of the Xinjiang People's Congress, Wang Mingshan, Vice Governor of Xinjiang, and Huo Liujun, a former party secretary of the region's Public Security Bureau. The U.S. said the 4 are being sanctioned for their connection to serious human rights abuse against ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, which reportedly include mass arbitrary detention and severe physical abuse, among other serious abuses targeting Uyghurs. The sanctions were imposed under the Global Magnitsky Act, which allows the U.S. government to target human rights violators worldwide. The 4 officials and their immediate family members are now barred from entering the United States, while their U.S.-based assets will also be frozen. Despite the sanctions, the White House still expects Beijing to honor their trade agreement.
Human rights is a paramount issue. It's very important. We took action. We've crafted a phase 1 deal. We hope the Chinese government will honor that.
In Beijing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian slammed the U.S. decision as a serious interference in China's internal affairs. He also urged the U.S. to correct this wrong decision, or China will take firm countermeasures. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
The United States has approved a proposed $620 million upgrade package for Patriot surface-to-air missiles to Taiwan. Taiwan has requested to buy components to upgrade its missiles in order to support an operational life of 30 years, the U.S. State Department said on Thursday. The department added that Taiwan will use this capability as a deterrent to regional threats and strengthen homeland defense. Taiwan's defense ministry expects the proposed arms sale to take effect within the next month. Back locally, police have arrested 7 people on suspicion of assisting a man who allegedly wounded a policeman with a knife on July 1st and then tried to flee the city by taking a flight to the UK.
According to sources, police investigations found a number of people gave assistance to the alleged attacker, including booking an air ticket to the UK and a return flight to Taiwan via Hong Kong. Kana Chu tells us more.
Aged 24 to 71, 5 men and 2 women were arrested yesterday. Among them were the alleged assailant's father, girlfriend, and others. Police took away cell phones and credit cards as evidence during the operation.
They assist the culprit to arrange tickets, the air ticket, and also transport to get to the airport.
That's in addition to supplying the alleged attacker with intelligence to dodge police pursuit. As investigations continue, police did not rule out the possibility of more arrests and warned those convicted of assisting offenders could face penalties of up to 10 years in prison. On July 1st, some protesters beleaguered and attacked a police tactical unit officer apprehending a man during a clearance operation in Causeway Bay. During the process, a man stabbed the policeman in the left arm near the shoulder with a knife. In the early hours of July 2nd, a 24-year-old man surnamed Wong was arrested at the airport. He was on board a flight bound for the United Kingdom. Charged with 1 count of wounding with intent, he was brought to the Eastern Magistrates Courts the following day. Kana Chu, TVB News.
A man who was previously ordered to perform 240 hours of community service for desecrating the national flag has now been given a 5-week jail term instead. This follows an appeal filed by the Department of Justice. The 21-year-old man stepped on the flag and later set fire to it during a protest in Chunmun last year. During the appeal hearing, the Department of Justice noted that the defendant, Tang Chi-lok, knew the flag was a government property but continued his actions along with some other people. The department said his actions called for a penalty heavier than the one previously handed down by the court to reflect the severity of the case. The magistrate agreed, saying the original sentence had not taken these factors into consideration. The funeral of billionaire and casino magnate Stanley Ho took place in North Point today. Many dignitaries were there to honor the once larger-than-life figure and to say their goodbyes. Natalie Kynes reports.
Hundreds of prominent political and business figures gathered at the Hong Kong funeral home to pay their respects to the late king of gambling, Stanley Ho. Ho's family members arrived early for preparations, including Pansy Ho, the eldest daughter of his second wife, and Angela Leong, his 4th wife. In the center of the funeral hall lay wreaths from loved ones. A sign above Ho's portrait reads, "Strategy and laughter," alluding to the late businessman's tendency to plan and plot, but always with a sense of humor. The ceremony began in the afternoon, with Pansy Ho reading out condolences offered by China's top leaders, including President Xi Jinping. Former Chief Executive Teng Chi-hua delivered a eulogy where he described Ho as a patriotic entrepreneur who went from rags to riches. Tung also praised Ho for being a staunch supporter of both Hong Kong and Macau. After the ceremony, Tung was a pallbearer alongside Chief Executive Carrie Lam, former Macau Chief Executive Edmund Ho, and Tan Tianyu, a Deputy Director of Beijing's Liaison Office in Hong Kong. Stanley Ho's family is expected to pick an auspicious day for his burial at Chu Yuan Cemetery on Mount Davis. Natalie Kynes, TVB News.
That's the news. Thanks for watching.
Have a very good night.